All the way back in April, I was working on a video or on a project that I gave the title Leveling Up in Video Games Sucks, which I know, pretty catchy. But this was a project where I basically took a good look at some of the RPG games that I played recently, such as, of course, The Division, but also The Witcher 3 at the time, and I asked myself the question if the leveling system in those games was really a good thing for the game or not. I know, sounds kind of ridiculous, right? You can't really think of an RPG game without the traditional leveling up and becoming stronger and building your character that way. But hear me out for a second, because the one downside that all of these games seem to have is that as long as you're not max level yet, and as long as you haven't completed the campaign yet and all that stuff, chasing good items and chasing good gear is basically a waste of time, because if you get something good, if you pursue some good loot, chances are, in a few hours you're going to have leveled up a few times and you're going to kill some trash mobs, which then give you some trash items, but those trash items then have better stats than the legendary item that you got a few hours ago that you worked really hard to get, which then meant that people automatically get less involved in the core of what the gameplay is all about, in building your character, getting better items, up until the very moment that they complete the game. For The Division, I for example made the argument that doing missions on a higher difficulty level while leveling up is pointless, because yes, if you complete a mission on a higher difficulty, you might get some more items, or even some higher tiered gear. You're going to get blue items instead of green items, but those blue items would still be a very low level, and thus, in just a few hours, that gear is going to be irrelevant anyway. So why would you ever complete those missions on a higher difficulty, right? And as a result, for a lot of players, the leveling up experience in The Division basically became a race to max level to only then start worrying about gear and weapons and all that stuff, and you just kind of just pick up whatever and use whatever you come across. And for The Witcher 3, I made the argument that I purposely avoided doing any treasure hunts throughout my playthrough, because I noticed very, very quickly while playing that the treasures and the loot that you find within the game, that actually scales with the player level. So if I'm level 4, I'm gonna get level 4 or level 5 treasures. But if I don't pick it up and just wait until I'm level 40 and then come back to that area, then those treasures are going to be level 40 items. So I was basically avoiding doing certain missions, which is never really something that you want to have within a game. And not only that, but I also found it pretty annoying that when I finally put together my feline armor set, that's just a few hours later, some random common item did more damage and gave me more armor than my min-maxed gear set. It kinda made me not care about the loot all that much and just go with the story, and just as with The Division, it kind of just became a race to max level. I still enjoyed the story, I still enjoyed the campaign, but in these games you have ways of crafting weapons, upgrading your weapons, modding your weapons, and especially in The Witcher, some of these things are irreversible, which then meant that I would just hoard up on all those resources, never use the crafting system, because I basically knew that whatever resources I would spend, it would all be a waste, because in a few hours I would get a better weapon anyway. I think that something like that is a shame, because it basically divides these type of games into two very separate experiences. First, you have of course the story, and only afterwards then you get to the character building. Well, I think that it is ideal that you want these things to collide with each other. You want people to get accustomed with the crafting system and the building system and the gear while they're going through the story. You don't want them to ignore that sort of thing. And I was thinking, what if these games simply had no leveling system? At least not a flat number going from 1 to 20 or 1 to 30 or 1 to 40. What kind of impact would that have on these type of games, and would it be to their benefit? It could mean a lot of things. For example, it could mean that NPCs don't have levels either to make them artificially stronger in certain areas. It could mean that players could get quote-unquote endgame gear relatively early in their playthrough, and that gear starts to matter right from the very start. It could make the transition between story content and endgame content a lot smoother as well, and even incentivize players to pursue better items through side missions, even though the side missions might be a little bit repetitive. So there is a lot to be gained from not having a leveling system, but for some reason I just never really finished the video and put it up on my YouTube. I basically rewrote the script a few times, I re-edited the video a few times, but at the end of the day I just felt that I never really got the point across. Trust me, the video was quite a mess after redoing certain things over and over and over, and I just gave up on the project. Maybe it sounded a bit too ridiculous to be realistic to not have a leveling system in RPG games, I just wasn't really sure how to convince anybody of the idea. But then, at this year's E3, we got Anthem, and we got The Division 2, which both of those games didn't entirely get rid of their leveling system, but the focus in both of those games seemed to have been pushed away from leveling. The Division has continuously pushed the idea in our faces that you quickly want to get level 30, and then the game opens up. That's when the game really starts, with specializations and plenty of endgame activities. And Anthem has confirmed the fact that a level 1 player can easily play with a max level player while still keeping the gameplay very balanced for everybody, while not making the NPCs one-shot or just ridiculously strong.
Our 4th squad member, Catherine, is about to join us. Catherine was taking a nap at launch, and while all her friends level 30, she's only level 1. But that's okay, because in Anthem, friends of any level can play together to earn experience and great rewards.
I'm not too sure on how Anthem's doing it. It could be that in Anthem, as you level up, you unlock more abilities for your exosuit, but you don't gain any absolute power, such as raw damage and health numbers. Or it could be that simply if you're undergeared and you join somebody that's a higher level, enemies automatically deal much less damage to you. It could be something like that as well. We don't really know how it's going to work yet, but either way, the emphasis is definitely not placed on the leveling experience for both of these games. And as I saw this, of course, keeping the video that I had secretly made 3 months ago in mind, I was like, it's pretty interesting, and it kind of gave me the motivation to revive this video idea again, which is basically what I'm doing right now. But before we talk about why removing a leveling system can actually be beneficial for the game, let's go over why games have a leveling system in the first place, because there are quite a few reasons as to why a leveling system is actually a good thing. Even though a level 4 character, decked out in level 4 gear, fighting level 4 enemies, will give you the exact same experience as a level 16 character, decked out in level 16 gear, fighting level 16 enemies. Those experiences are pretty much the same, but the fact that you can destroy level 4 enemies when you're level 16, and the fact that there are numbers on the screen that are much higher when you're level 16, that makes the players think that they're actually going somewhere. It gives this sense of progression, even though in reality, all you have is maybe a few new abilities or a couple different weapons that give you a little bit of a different playstyle, but not that much actually changes. So the leveling system is there to kind of, push that sense of progression. Second of all things, having a leveling system where players get absolute strength per level, again, more damage and more health, allows the developers to very easily determine the difficulty of the game at any time and sort of push players towards or away from certain areas or missions. Sure, in The Division and to an extent also in The Witcher 3, these are open world games and a lot of missions can be played in whatever order you want. With The Witcher 3, this applies a little bit more to the side missions, not so much to the main missions, but because of the leveling system that is in place and the recommended level that every mission gives you, most players still complete most of the missions in the exact same order, as the developers probably wanted them to. It's very rare for a level 4 player to complete a level 10 mission, because those are usually very, very difficult. You have to play near perfect to complete it, and that's usually not worth the time, right? And also, something that I also wanted to bring up, maybe it's a good thing to have a clear line between the story and the endgame without mashing the two together too much, because if you integrate gearing and character building during the story, there also needs to be some content during the story that challenges the players and their builds, because otherwise, what's the point of gearing up during the story, right? Which for some players could actually be a bad thing. And again, I think that this argument applies more to The Witcher than to The Division, but I do believe that a lot of people don't really care too much for the gear and the loot in these type of games and just want to cruise through the story without having to worry too much about building their character every step of the way. So straight up removing a leveling system, it does come with a lot of potential issues. But there are also some solutions for these, I think. To give players a sense of progression, I think the best way to go about it is to add a lot of horizontal progression in the game. Now, what I mean by that is that if leveling up from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 10, giving you more raw power each time is something that we can call vertical progression, because we're basically climbing up, right? Well, in that case, then horizontal progression would be having different skill trees that don't necessarily add to your raw stats, don't necessarily give you more HP or damage, but instead allow you to play the game in a different way, with different type of weapons or abilities, that sort of stuff. Sounds familiar? Yeah, because it's nothing new. It's pretty much what classes are in video games, or what the Division 2 is doing with specializations. You get new weapons, different type of grenades, different skills, different talents, maybe a few stat boosts here and there, but as you progress through your specialization, you won't get much more absolute strength, so to speak. Yes, you get different skills, but they're gonna replace other skills, and those replacements are not necessarily better. Yes, you get different type of grenades, but again, those grenades are not necessarily better, they just offer you a different playstyle. And I think that having systems like that in games allows players to have that sense of progression without them necessarily gaining more health and more damage each time they level up, which then allows loot and item drops during your playthrough to be much more important. Because when you get that epic item for completing a mission on the highest available difficulty, it isn't just a level 6 epic item that's going to be useless to you as soon as you get level 8, which was the case with the Witcher 3 gear sets and with all the loot in the Division up until you got to level 30, but instead, that item is going to be, you're gonna want that item, you're gonna want to pursue those items during the leveling up experience, during the story experience. And just because players don't have levels to them, that doesn't mean that all the NPCs have to be equally strong. You could still have weak enemies in one area and strong enemies in another, but instead of it being the exact same enemy, but just with a different number above their head, you could add different types of enemies altogether, with different movesets, harder hitting attacks, and that sort of stuff. So if the developers want players to complete the game in a certain order, there's still a way to do that. You can still influence very much how players play the game by making one mission easier than the other. There's still plenty of ways to do that outside of artificially making the content more difficult through adding in enemies with higher stats. But then there's still the biggest challenge to overcome, of course, which is that if you're going to make the gearing an important part of the game during the leveling experience to make meaningful progression, well, then you're always going to have some people that are just very, very unlucky, who keep getting shit drops over and over, which then may prevent them from progressing through the story altogether, which is especially a problem if said players just want to experience the story and don't really want to care too much about the gearing game. So, how do you solve this issue? Well, it kind of depends from game to game, but I think it could very easily be solved with a game like, for example, The Division 1. I feel like the system is almost already in place. You of course know how you can select a different difficulty of missions at the start of each of them. You have normal, hard, challenge mode, and in some of those missions you even have legendaries, right? But what if during your playthrough all those different difficulties would also be available, which then would give the players different tiers of rewards. Normal gives you green items, hard mode gives you blue items, challenge mode purple items, and so on basically. And with a system like this, that could easily allow players to progress through the story in any way that they want. If you want an experience that holds your hand, you just want to go through the story and you don't want to care about the gearing too much, very simple. Just play every mission on normal difficulty, keep getting green items as a reward and maybe an occasional blue item here and there, and that will be that. You can just cruise through the story as you wish. If you're one of those more hardcore players and you actually want to try to gear up in any meaningful way while playing through the story, well, then you can play the missions on maybe hard mode to get blue items, and once you got a couple of blue items, maybe try to get challenge mode for some purple items, and then by the end of your playthrough, you might already be halfway through having a decent build. In both cases, players get the experience that they want. The casuals can just enjoy the story, and the hardcore player isn't forced to speedrun through the story in order to finally get to the gearing part of the game. Because the gearing part of the game could start right from the moment that you do the first mission. Or maybe the second one, let the first mission be an introduction or something. And again, a system like this would probably not work for every game, since a lot of games don't really ask you to set the difficulty of the mission before the mission starts. But you can get creative with this and tweak it depending on what type of game we're talking about. The point of a system like this is to bring the story and the end game closer together to create one fuller experience rather than two separate ones. And I think that by removing the leveling system, that can go a long way. At the end of the day, a player's level is just a number, which in itself doesn't really change the experience at all. You're level 4, fighting level 4 enemies. It's exactly the same as if you're level 16, fighting level 16 enemies, but the thing that the leveling system does have an impact on is that it prevents players from having a gearing and looting game that matters all the way up until they hit the level cap. The thing that I will do with the Division 2 is rush to level 30 and only then start messing around with things, only then start trying to go for better gear, only then start exploring all the options. And players did the same with the Division 1, players did the same with Destiny, the same with Destiny 2, and I think that there are ways to improve that system to make those games better. But that's going to be it for me today though. Let me know what you think about this video, not only about the idea itself, of course, but also about the format. I think a lot about in-game systems like this all the time, and I thought it would be worth to share one of these shower thoughts, so to speak, for once. Just to see if it is something that you guys would be interested in. But yeah, as always, I'll see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.